something a poor kid would understand, but would utterly confuse a rich kid. Story 1. My entire identity revolves around food. I use my spare, fun money on food now. I give gifts of food, I take friends out to eat, I give people their fav snacks and candy bars as little surprises. We never had enough as a kid, we went hungry every day. And now, I express myself through food. I'll bring friends dinner, I'll bake people's favorites, I'll bring my coworkers entire casseroles, I'll take huge pots of soup to our neighbors. I'm getting emotional right now, just thinking about how important the availability of food is to me. I have an 18-year-old coworker that doesn't eat lunch during break for our 12-hour shift, so I started packing twice as much and I feed her the extra I bring. I just want all my friends and family to be full, to never have to feel hunger like my family did, like I did. I don't want that for them. Story 2. Sugar sandwiches for dinner. Butter, sugar, and bread. We thought it was like dessert for dinner, but my mom told us recently it was because we didn't have any food. Story 3. That going to the nearest beach is a vacation. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Let me clear some things out. I live in Greece, so going to a hotel next to the beach is called a small vacation by some people. Now, I'm not poor, not wealthy. My family makes more than what my friends do, but our priorities usually end up costing us our vacations. Story 4. The guilt versus gratitude relationship. Fight you have when your friends share their food with you. Because on one hand, you never have enough money to buy enough food to be fully sated, so that extra from your friends is awesome. But on the other hand, you understand how awful it is not to have enough food at lunch, and you don't want to put your friends in that position. Story 5. Every time you get a little bit ahead, an extra $100 or so, and being able to relax and breathe a bit. Next day, something goes catastrophically wrong with the car, or an appliance, or an unexpected late charge on something you forgot about. It never ends. One step forward, two steps back. Story 6. I was a poor kid who was lucky enough to go to a good high school. The downside of that was growing up next to entitled brats. I've seen a girl throw her brand new gold iPhone across the room and not bat an eye because her parents would buy her a new one. Sure enough, the next time I saw her, she had one. These are the same kids that crash the new cars they get for their birthdays, get manicures, facials, and eyelash every week despite never working a day in their lives. On the other side, I was scared when I ripped the strap off the backpack I had been using for 4 years. I sewed the thing up because I didn't want to stress my mom out with having to find a new one for me. I used it for 2 more years through college until it finally kicked the bucket and I was able to get a new one. Story 7. How bad it feels when a non-poor kid, even up to adulthood, mentions doing something expensive casually or worse, makes a big deal about you never doing it. Like 1. Flying. 2. Going to another country. 3. Going to Disney World. Going to a hibachi restaurant or fancy steakhouse. 5. Doing camps, programs that cost money at school or during the summer. You've never known months? Seems so confusing to them that it's true, and never crosses their mind you might feel self-conscious about it. Hint, everyone does. Edit. Since this got traction, I'd like to add sleeping on the floor and/or without a real blanket, not by choice. Story 8. You get to eat the leftovers which the guest didn't eat, as your parents make the best items for your guests. Edit. It's not about eating leftovers, but you get to eat food which your parents normally don't give it to you. Story 9. Back in high school, I was getting flamed for having cheap shoes from Marshalls. Here's something along the lines of how it went. Kid. Those shoes are ugly, as... Me. I agree. I gotta wait for my next paycheck so you can grab some new ones. Kid. Why don't you just ask your parents buy you shoes? Me. Because they gotta put money in more important places right now. Kid. Wait, so your parents don't buy you new shoes? Me. Nah, I gotta save up. Kid. Look of extreme confusion. The confusion of the kid when he realized that most parents don't buy their kids everything they want was something I won't forget. In typical high school fashion, he then proceeded to tease me for being broke, also explaining to others that the only time I left my home state was for family emergencies, was something that they couldn't grasp either. Story 10. What it is like to eat spaghetti for over a year and a half straight. Other than my birthday, that is exactly what I've done and am doing. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Sorry I had to have a moment. Stressed myself out. Story 11. Getting upset when clothes, shoes, or other basic items are ruined. If I had a hole in my shoe or a stain or tear on my clothes, I had to live with it, at least for a while. I knew kids in the middle and upper classes that would get chewed out for stuff like that, but their parents would usually buy them new stuff right away. That wasn't the case for a lot of kids like me because it just wasn't possible. Most of the clothes I owned were hand-me-downs to begin with. Some of it was found in the garbage. Story 12. I remember when we would go shopping for school clothes, it was at Walmart or Kmart, And it was always the sale items and one size up so we could grow into it. Story 13. When I was a small and nimble child, my father would slip me into the vents of his client's house to scare the rats out, whereupon my siblings would be waiting to bludgeon them to death with the family soup ladles. We were a whole family of ratters. We lived rats, killed rats, and when times were tough, ate rats too. Story 14. Parents borrowing birthday money to help with bills or buying food and toiletries. Love them to death. They've always worked hard for me and my sister. Oh, and not having health insurance. Story 15. The actual process of looking at something in a store and debating whether or not it's really something they need or is it something they want, before trying to see if they can find a cheaper version. Story 16. I was 7 or 8 and my rich cousin, just a few years older, screamed at me because I didn't know how to put on a seatbelt. Last time I had entered a car, I still need a baby chair. Also, being weirded out by fresh peas because you've only eaten canned all your life. I still prefer them canned. Story 17. Relaxing in an empty parking lot is your friend's car is a typical night out because nobody has anything at home and don't want to be there anyways because it's too stressful. Story 18. We couldn't afford cable growing up, so ergo, I didn't see a lot of movies. I oft get ridiculed as a 35-year-old for not seeing them. Mighty Ducks, Sandlot, Goonies, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters all come to mind off the top of my head. And I always get the, how have you never seen these? And now, it's at a point where I don't have too much of a desire to see a kid's movie for the first time from 20 plus years ago. Not really complaining because my mom did a lot to keep my childhood together, but most of my friends don't understand that not having cable cut off access to a lot of the references they remember so fondly. Story 19. You have to get creative for entertainment. Rarely had toys and friends definitely couldn't come over. Sugar rice was very common, so was on a shingle. White gravy with meat on white bread was at least once a week. Parents constantly busy with work and side jobs and being exhausted all the time. Hand-me-downs were new clothes, sharing a room with multiple family members, having to do chores without getting money or a reward, always getting consoles and games like 2 to 5 years after they released and everyone was on to new. Bruh, there's a lot. Story 20. Your mother says it's dinner time. You eat what she's can afford to make or go hungry, no exceptions. Or proudly teaching your child there is nothing wrong to shop in the reduced section of the supermarket, or visit a charity shop and have them love the savings they get by doing so, and beg you to go back for more cheap deals. Story 21. They call it intermittent fasting by not eating breakfast, but that's pretty standard to me how I grew up. Not eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, because there was no food. Story 22. That the next excursion with the school is not too expensive to be able to go and have fun with your friends. I remember I was acting like, that's for kids. I don't go to that, but I wanted to go, but I couldn't. Being worried about starting the school year without the books because they've changed them and they're not like last year's and you need new books. And they're very expensive. Not saying where you live because you're ashamed to live in the worst building in town. Not being able to buy the new jacket or hoodie that everyone has. And if you're from a rich town like me, it's 15 times worse because for them, rich, it's like normal. Story 23. Every term our school would do a thing called scholastic books. It's like a catalog of books and other educational things that parents can go through, put what they think their child will like and order them. The school gets a percentage of the sales and the kids get an education-filled Christmas unboxing every term. Almost every kid in my class would get at least one thing. Expect me. So, just sitting in the back of class watching other kids showing off their new stuff to each other. One year a kid left before the order came in and the teacher gave his book to me. Rich kids will never know the feeling of being poor, having it noticed and not being shamed for it. It was the only time I ever got a book from Scholastic and I still have it. Side note, I'm all grown up and am not super poor. Every term my mom and I pick a class at the local primary school and buy books for every student that doesn't have a book order in that classroom. It's a mixed school, half rich people and half poor people living in a trailer park struggling to get by. Edit. Spelling. Story 24. According to some other people I know, it's a lack of cleanliness. Don't know if that's the right word for it. An ex-neighbor of mine, older lady, requested me specifically to help clean her property and pack her stuff when she was moving. Apparently, she asked for me because she knew I'd understand in regards to the state of her house and the yard. I mean, she was right. My family also had a bit of a white trash, redneck kind of property with all the trappings, but it didn't dawn on me that other people also did it. I wouldn't expect anyone who isn't from the country or didn't live on a street in the woods with no streetlights to understand the nuances of the way a redneck yard and house looks and operates. Yes, we have a bug problem and at least 2 defunct broken cars sitting in the grass, but I promise we're not crazy stereotypes. It's safe, I assure you. Story 25. Using your clothing as first aid items such as a sweatshirt being a splint wrapping. Also eating the common leftover food items. You can't be that much of a picky eater if there are leftovers. Story 26. Going to the mall with friends. Not buying anything. Not trying anything on in case you damage it. Not buying any food or snacks. And making excuses why you can't go see the movie with everyone else. Saying you left your phone at home so they don't see the old flip phone or first-gen smartphone you've been passed down. Leaving quickly without saying goodbye to anyone so they don't see your mom pull up in the ancient station wagon your family's had for the last decade. Story 27. Cooking everything, including pizza, from scratch because restaurants and pre-made food are too expensive. On the rare occasion food was purchased from a restaurant, it was either because my father was out of town or we were buying leftover cold chicken, not the freshly cooked hot chicken, from the local chicken shack. Story 28. Camping was a vacation. No, I've never been to Disney. No, I've never been outside the US. Yes, even Canada. Thrift shopping school clothes was back-to-school shopping. And dollar store for supplies. Will the electric bill get paid this month or will there be groceries? Nobody knows. Story 29. Expiration dates are more like suggestions than fact. They have to set them earlier than they actually expect the food to expire so as to avoid complaint. Had a roommate throw out all of my and our other roommates' food because it was a weekmas before Sasar the expiration date. She honestly didn't understand why we were livid. She thought she was helping. Story 30. Gotta walk in the center of the street when it's late at night. You order all the toppings when it's no extra price. Don't buy the dollar water from the street vendor. 40. Two tall boys when it comes to price point. Double cheeseburger with mac sauce. They sell liquor if you know how to order in cash-only dine-ins. You fold the bill and hold in your fingers between middle and ring as you high-five to exchange. If they come with a crew, you bail. Goya. Story 31. Driving with the check engine light on all the time. Can't get a new car, can't get it fixed, but have to take it to get to work so you can make rent. Just drive and hope it doesn't stall out or blow up. Story 32. Group daycare. All of the poorer kids at my elementary school all went to the same group daycare when they were preschool. Kids with richer parents either had a stay-at-home parent or had their own personal babysitter. Story 33. Learning skills to make do with what you have. I remember not having very much money growing up and needing to learn lots of computer and network-related troubleshooting skills because I couldn't rely on my parents simply buy a new computer or update the modem or router. We couldn't simply pay to have ISP technicians come out all the time, and my parents couldn't afford the time off to address those types of issues. Also, being afraid of going to the doctor or dentist. This wasn't stemming from being afraid of needles or getting teeth pulled, but more for a concern of whether or not something that was found would be sufficiently covered by insurance, and weighing that against whether or not you truly feel bad. I remember having a really weak immune system at a certain point when I was 16 years old, and not wanting to go to the doctors until the pain was too unbearable. Turned out that I had shingles. Yes, I'm aware that it's extremely uncommon for someone that young to have it, but yes, I did in fact get diagnosed with shingles, and I'm not mistaking it for something else. There was also a time where finals were approaching during my third year in my major, electrical engineering, when I was feeling some pain in my abdomen and reading up on the symptoms. I foolishly decided that my self-diagnosis was sufficient and stayed home to tough out what I suspected to be a kidney stone rather than see a doctor because I figured that they'd expect me to pass it on my own anyway. I ended up passing the kidney stone halfway through finals week. As someone who grew up in an environment that disincentivized the usage of healthcare, I really have to be mindful to make full use of it now that I'm older, and maintaining my health matters more. It's crazy how much small things matter when you're poor, and how little thought you are able to put into them if you're financially stable. Story 34. Not having the latest model of a phone or laptop. I have friends that are super rich that they tend to buy new iPhones and MacBooks every time there's a new release. And then there's me who can't even afford to buy a box of pizza. Story 35. There were always a few things that signaled to me that someone was rich when I was a kid. Middle class. 1. Ordering a drink besides water at a restaurant. This was forbidden in our house. 2. Staying at a Holiday Inn or better, where the motel room didn't open to the parking lot. 3. Kids who could actually buy something at the store. We never had money unless a grandparent gave us a $5 bill for Christmas. 4. People who had a music collection, and not just songs recorded off the radio. 5. Kids who wore expensive clothing labels. 6. Kids who had a bike with gears, instead of a single-speed BMX bike like me. 7. People who went to movies. Story 36. Saving trash. Rich people don't bother with food scraps or the boxes things came in, because why would you store trash in your fridge and closet instead of getting rid of it now? Story 37. So, a little off tangent here, but one thing I don't think people understand is that Being poor in an urban area sucks. But I'd argue in many ways, being poor in a rural area sucks even more. In my adult life, escaped from the poor forgotten town I grew up in, I've met a lot of other people who grew up poor also. And the ones from larger areas, the story is like, oh, thank God we had things like the local Y or whatever, after-school tutoring program for poor kids or teach music in the ghetto type stuff. And it's like, we didn't have any of that. You were just dirt poor, and no one fucking knew your town even exists or gives you about it. So yeah, that's one thing I've heard from even other former poor kids. They'll ask things like, what community programs did you go to? Or the like, and I have to explain, hey, we didn't even have that. We were just all poor out in the boonies with nothing around, and even our own state government pretended that part of the state doesn't exist. Story 38. In the US in February, you get better than Christmas when the income tax check hit. We'd get new shoes and have cable for a couple months. Even. McDonald's. Ha ha ha, been so long I forgot about that. Story 39. Why you get to eat but your parents or parent don't. Bologna and mustard for lunch every day. Beanie. Whinies. For those of you who don't know, you take beans and hot dogs and combine them. Beanie wines. Egg noodles and Parmesan. Story 40. Don't ever get ice in your fast food drinks. You get less soda, and you don't need your drink to stay cold if you drink it fast since they keep it cold in the fountain dispenser. Story 41. That's spending $400 on a pair of name-brand sneakers because you think they look cool or because you want to fit in is wasteful. Sorry, spoiled brats, but those Yeezys are not worth the money and neither are they worth the 5 seconds of ego. Story 42. Don't go near the cops. They are bad. This is a sad thing to say, but here in Brazil, poor and black people are usually killed, humiliated for nothing. Usually our moms tell us to stay away from cops because most of them are corrupt. Edit. Forgot a coma, sorry. Story 43. Fruit juice, even the fake kind, is a luxury. Boxed mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs baked into it is a fine casserole. Salvation Army sells prom dresses that are in great shape. Duct tape on shoes isn't just a fashion statement, it's a necessity. Space heaters are for when your gas utility gets cut off. And all the windows are open because the electric got cut off and we need the light in the house. There are more, but I think that's pretty comprehensive, lol. Story 44. Navigating higher education when your parents didn't go to college. So much of your success in college is based on your ability to utilize on-campus resources and meeting with faculty and staff about opportunities and for assistance. That all wasn't totally obvious to me, and I feel like it really inhibited my success in school. I remember having to turn down an offer for an internship in DC because it was unpaid, and I didn't know there was an office at school that would help find funding to live there. Getting the financial aid office and the financial service office confused on a regular basis and feeling super stupid. Because of it is also a fond memory. Story 45. Doing all your own work on your house and learning how to do all this work on your own. Bathroom leak. Dad learns how to do basic plumbing. Need to do some basic wiring. Dad learns basic electrical. Need to add a new addition to the house? Dad learns basic carpentry. Need the roof re-shingled? Dad learns how to re-shingle a roof. Broken window? Dad learns how to install new glass or replace an entire window. By the time I was 12, I was learning how to do carpentry, mechanics, wiring, plumbing, construction, landscaping, metalwork, welding, building, renovations, and repairing. I learned how to drive a truck at 13, tractor at 14, and heavy equipment at 16. By the time I was 20, I could fix and maintain anything in my own house. By the time I was 30, I could literally build an entire house and everything that goes with it on my own. I wasn't the best, the fastest, or the most efficient, but I could do just about anything with my own hands. I grew up in a remote native community where we had no easy access to construction workers, plumbers, electricians, or mechanics. We had to learn how to do all these things on our own. It's amazing what you can learn to do when are forced to. Story 46. 1. Using the last bit of ketchup and using ramen noodles without the flavor packet to pretend to have a decent meal. Yeah, it's hot and might have some taste, but... Or ketchup, mustard, and relish packets with hot water, soup, and stale crackers. 2. Looking forward to your older brother growing out of his old clothes, so you have something different to wear to school. Story 47. The difference between Medicaid and Medicare. I'm not even rich, I'm just middle class, and I still have no idea what the differences are. I also wouldn't know how to fill out a government assistance application form. Story 48. I had some poor times, better at my teenage years, as a kid. When you eat bread with canned pate, B sees it is cheaper than the butter where I live, and give some to your dog to have a filled stomach. Yeah, Anne was getting annoyed with dry food, so she had some too. Story 49. Watching your mom push food away to you or your dad, even though she was still hungry. Also, your parents sacrificing their health for yours. We didn't have low-income health care, and while I always got proper medical care, my parents did without. Shit, that was rough to relive. Story 50. I grew up in communism, and let me tell you, Romania in the 1980s would confuse most of you. Hot water stopped running after 9 p.m. No hot water between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. next day. Hot water between 6-8 a.m. and 3-9 p.m. on most days, except Saturday, Sunday. We did not have 2 days off every weekend. We went to school Monday through Saturday. Every second day, I would wake up at 5:45 and be in line at a shop about 500 meters away from my house to buy milk. The queue would be variable, but some days the milk would finish before I got a chance to buy it. Shops did not have milk, butter, fresh bread, the basics. At random times in the evening, electricity would turn itself off, and sometimes it stayed off for hours. This was part of our dictator's plan to save energy. It got so bad that, as a med student, because I had to study for exams and refused to do it by candlelight, I wasn't going to my eyesight for that. I made a chart with times and regions where electricity was cut for about a month. Then, I would make sure not to be in that neighborhood when electricity was expected to be cut. So I ended up visiting people who had electricity so I could study. Luckily, they understood and left me alone. I saw a banana, green, for the first time at age 23, in 1988. I sat in line for 4 hours to buy oranges, outdoors, in freezing temperatures. I managed. To enter the U.S. Embassy in Romania, in 1992, I had to line up for 18 hours. Need I continue? Story 51. This is something that 30-year-old me needs to remember from time to time, that 24-year-old me had to go through. That daily fear of, will my car die today? There were tons of problems that were going to be expensive to diagnose and fix, and I couldn't afford to keep trying to repair it. I definitely couldn't afford a new car. Luckily, my car lasted a couple more years until I could get a better job. I think this translates to kids, in that when you don't have much, your toys, clothes, and other things have to last. If your pants rip, you either have to deal with ripped pants, or you have to sew it yourself. You can't just take it to a tailor or go buy new ones. If your toys break, you either had fix them or make do. Story 52. The generic aisle where it's nothing but white packaging with large black letters like ground coffee, laundry detergent, corn, cereal, etc. It always weirds me out that even color itself isn't for poor people at that point. Story 53. One winter, we burned furniture in the fireplace for warmth. I have never said this aloud to anyone, including my family who were there. Story 54. My dad would make this thing I called perpetual casserole. It'd start on day 1 with something like pasta and chili. Day number 2 would get frozen mixed vegetables added. Day number 3 might be sliced up hot dogs. Day number 4 could be lentils. Day number 5 was more beans. Day number 6, more vegetables. Basically every day it got brought back up to its original volume and reheated. We'd eat and then the rest would go in the fridge. He could stretch something out 2 weeks that way. At the end it tasted like nothing specific, but it tasted like something. Occasionally, he'd get fancy and throw gelatin in with it. Then when it got cold he could cut pieces off, like a slice off a loaf, and make a sandwich out of it if there was bread. Story 55. Being geographically uneducated to an embarrassing degree. We never went anywhere beyond the neighboring suburbs. I was 18 before I realized there was more than one train line. I was meeting a friend in the city and they organized to meet at a train station that wasn't on my line, but had a similar name to one that was. I was pretty embarrassed when I realized I was in the wrong place and also stupid. Story 56. When I was in Paris, we used a hand signal to let others know that the police have boarded the tram, and if you don't have a valid ticket, you should get off at the next stop. They are really intense about it, and will fine you on the spot for not having a ticket. They rarely check tickets, and the street trams don't have the automatic ticket checkers like the subway does, which is why it's so common for people to not buy one. Story 57. Almost forgot. When I was 8 or 9 somewhere in the mid-60s, my parents raised my weekly allowance from 25 cents to 50 cents. Within a year, I asked them to lower it back to a quarter because they never 50 cents on them. At a quarter, I at least got something. Story 58. Feeling guilty when you receive presents because of your birthday or Christmas. You know your parents are low on money, but they still bought you something. Story 59. Realizing as an adult that you were probably the pity friend. Don't get me wrong, my friends were and are great, but looking back now always has an air of, why did they even bother talking to me? I even asked once, the answer was because I was nice to pretty much everyone, but it's really tainted my memories. Story 60. Sharing humility. In many cases, buying shoes that are more than $100 for the first time with like 18 years or more. Not buying expensive clothes as long as you are growing. Story 61. Growing up in the foster care system, still am, I've noticed that I tend to check prices on things more often, as well as focusing more on what I exactly need and its price tag. It sounded like a normal thing to do to me, but then I went out with some friends just to find them pulling out an extra 10 or 20 just on stupid and not caring about what the expense is. I understand that people will be a bit ignorant with their money in this world, but that lifestyle in my eyes seems like a horrible thing to have at my age, as it doesn't show you the value of the dollar. It may be a bit biased as I'm kind of pre-exposed to this type of, but IDK. Story 62. Living on pizza pockets, craft dinner, and canned noodles until your parents get paid next. The next payday comes and they have to pay rent, so you end up continuing to live on pizza pockets. Finally, your parents say they have enough to get groceries, but not too much because they're behind on the power and Wi-Fi bill. Wi-Fi, phones, etc. get shut off for until they can pay back what they're behind on, plus interest, and the $600 fee to get it reset up. You watch old movies on your old DVD player whilst having no Wi-Fi, and make your younger siblings swear to not complain as to not stress your parents out. You're too afraid to ask your parents for money to go somewhere with your friends because you don't want to burden them and you feel selfish so you don't make plans. Feeling bad about eating, drinking, etc. at your friend's house because you know how expensive it was for that fancy juice or real pizza they have. Being gobsmacked by how big your friends' houses are. Do you seriously have 2, 3, 4 bathrooms? Your bedroom is so big, you have 2 living rooms? What? Parents are always working, and when they aren't, they're catching up on sleep and you start to miss them, offering to get a job to help pay rent, but your parents tell you that they're fine, even though you know they're stressed. Babysitting your younger siblings and not getting paid because you need to help your parents while they're working. Watching your parents keep not getting called back for jobs and not knowing what they're going to do. Your parents pushing you really hard to study and do great so you don't end up like them. I could go on, but this is just getting sad. Story 63 grew up as one of the poorest kids in a fairly wealthy neighborhood. Was on the academic team's senior year. We're going to meet off campus, at everyone's houses. Not at mine. A group of 9 teenagers along with a teacher or two is not going to fly in my 1-bedroom apartment. I was the only kid whose parents didn't own their own home. Story 64. I don't think rich people in general understand the idea of not buying matching furniture or stylish furniture, but rich kids specifically don't understand that mom needs to work, so I couldn't just randomly stay after school whenever I want. Rich kids don't understand fend for yourself night for dinner, and they really don't understand what it's like to have your family choose between cable and internet. My family chose internet so that we could do school projects. Story 65. Getting in trouble for an injury. LOL. And learning how to medically treat yourself because healthcare is expensive. That's okay though, because I think that is partially why I am in the field of medicine now. Story 66. Having the real brand. Ritz crackers in your cabinet and nobody is eating them. That was when you knew times were good. Also not eating school lunch so your little sister could instead to save money. I took a muffin and a bottle of water to eat for a month or 2 straight. Story 67. Having to throw away your toilet paper in the waste bin because your house has pipes from the 70s and you don't have the money to tear up your whole house to replace them, or the money to move. For backstory, this was my boyfriend's house, not mine. It confused me even as an adult. Story 68. Having to nail up extra blankets on the windows so it doesn't get too cold in the wintertime. Also, butter noodles, bread and butter, is still a good meal. Story 69. When I was a kid, if the bread was moldy, Mom would just pick off the green bits and say the mold was good for you anyway. I never cared, and I'm still alive. Story 70. Getting fresh fruit for Christmas. We were too poor to buy fresh produce or juice. On Christmas morning, we would have an orange in our stockings. As we got older, and the 80s job slump had passed, more varieties of fruit appeared each Christmas. I still remember my first time touching a real pineapple. It was under the tree and had my name on it. It was the most beautiful flavor I had ever tasted. Now that I'm an adult, I buy myself a pineapple every few weeks. I feel like a king putting it on the grocery belt, and I still feel that same happiness I felt as a kid eating my first pineapple. Damn it, Reddit. Now I'm cutting onions. Story 71. I don't know what salary the poverty line is at, but I do know that we're poor. I pay $300 in rent. My sister-in-law pays $200. Just yesterday, we were $100 short on the phone bill. It's always just this shame almost when you go out to eat. You know that mom is spending her last $50 for a nice meal. When you just snack for dinner. It's basically having sleep for dinner. All our money goes towards bills, evening the balance in mom's account, and groceries. Gas tank is never full. Movies are big occasions. Child support and the tax return are huge helps. Just worrying about money all the time. It's sad. I want to leave it so much. I don't want my kids to feel this. I want to make sure that they can depend on our finances. It's scary. Not wanting to be trapped. Story 72. Having to collect rainwater or if we were desperate, to fill the cistern of the toilet to flush it, playing with your mattress, trying to balance on it as long as possible before it bends/collapses, since you don't own any toys, missing a ton of school because you smell terrible and don't feel like being publicly harassed for it, basically living in an extended cab pickup truck for a few months, your parents in the front and you and your brother in the back. But it wasn't so bad because the radio was always on Radio Disney. My folks did a good job of making us not feel poor as kids, but wholly looking back on it, I can't help but realize just how desperate of a situation we were in. Story 73. Lining up to get the box of food from the government. Dad was in the Army in the 70s, 80s, and they very firmly subscribed to, if we wanted you to have a family, you'd have been issued one. So, wife and 2 kids on enlisted pay meant government cheese, rice, and white label black print generic food. One of the first things we did every time we were moved was finding out which local churches had charity food and clothes boxes too. Christmas present to boy, 8 to 12, were a thing too. Story 74. I go to a top university on full scholarship because my mother and I lived on Social Security checks a large majority of the time, and I was successful in school. I remember talking to a girl from across my dorm hall who asked how it was even possible to not have a driver's license and new car at 16, or not be able to take senior pictures professionally, or not even get a bunch of nice grad gifts. I'm almost 19, and I'm just able to afford to take my driving test because of a paid internship I fell into this summer. In high school, my mother cried when she couldn't get expensive photos taken of me for graduating, or having to use the grad money I got from friends' parents to buy groceries for the month. I walked away from that conversation thinking really hard about how I want to raise my kids one day. I plan to be a doctor, and my boyfriend is going to be a mechanical engineer. Both of us came from poor families. I hope that my children will never have to worry about money growing up, but I also hope they understand the privilege they will have and be conscious of others' backgrounds.